I didn't think I did anything wrong, just told the truth the way I saw it. I laughed at my husband's tiny number, called him a loser in front of friends, and thought he'd just sulk a little. Instead, he's filing legal papers, and everyone is acting like I'm the one who destroyed the marriage. Thomas bragged once about being respectful in relationships, and when the topic of body count came up with friends, I couldn't help myself. I laughed and said his number was embarrassingly low, that he was basically a loser compared to real men who had lived a little. People laughed and I felt powerful. Thomas went red in the face, silent, and later tried to tell me I humiliated him. I told him he was being dramatic, that it was just a joke, and that only insecure men get hurt by playful banter. My sister Cara told me he needed to toughen up, and my parents said I was too harsh, but I brushed it off. I had to keep control of the story. At the bar later, when Callum the bartender leaned in and called me wild, I felt seen in a way Thomas never managed. I told myself it was harmless, just attention, but the thrill stayed with me. Thomas noticed, of course. He asked if Callum was more exciting than him, and I said maybe he should stop being jealous and start acting like a man. He looked crushed, but I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I felt annoyed that he couldn't handle a confident wife. Everyone thinks I broke something precious that night, but I still believe I was just honest. The problem is, Thomas didn't argue back like usual. He went quiet, started gathering things in folders, making phone calls he wouldn't explain. I assumed it was work. Now I know it wasn't. The night everything really began to unravel was a Friday when we went out with friends from the neighborhood. It was one of those casual bar nights where people told stories, played pool, and shared too many pitchers of beer. The music was loud enough to cover most of the conversations, but not so loud that jokes couldn't carry across the table. Someone brought up relationships, and inevitably, the subject shifted to past partners. I could feel Thomas tense next to me, because he was never comfortable talking about that sort of thing. He was the quiet, steady type, and honestly, that embarrassed me sometimes. When one of my friends asked jokingly about body counts, I smirked and said mine was respectable. Then someone asked Thomas, and he shrugged, saying he wasn't really into that kind of thing. The table laughed awkwardly, and I saw my chance to take the spotlight. I leaned in and sneered, saying he had such a low number it barely counted, that he was basically a loser compared to men who had lived real lives. The table burst out laughing, and in that moment I felt powerful. I saw Thomas's face go pale, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word. Instead, he just sipped his drink and stared at the table. I told myself he would get over it. After all, it was just a joke. Later, when he pulled me aside and asked why I said that, I told him he was being dramatic. I said everyone knew it was light-hearted banter. He said it felt like I was trying to embarrass him. I rolled my eyes and told him only insecure men got hurt by playful comments. He didn't answer. He just went quiet, which annoyed me even more. At the table, Cara, my sister, leaned over and whispered that he needed to man up. She laughed, posting a short clip of me teasing him with the caption, "Queen Energy." My parents weren't there, but when they heard later what I had said, my mother frowned and said I was cruel. My father just shook his head, but I brushed it off, telling them they were overreacting. Marta, his mother, though, didn't stay quiet. She called me the next morning and said I had crossed a line, that respect between husband and wife was sacred. I told her she was just protecting her precious son, and that she never liked me anyway. After I hung up, I told myself I had defended my dignity. The truth was, the bar incident stayed in my mind. At work the following week, Callum, the bartender from that night, texted me saying I had been the life of the party. He joked that Thomas looked like he couldn't keep up with me. I laughed and let him flirt. It was harmless, I told myself, just validation that I was still exciting. When Thomas asked why my phone buzzed so much, I told him it was work. He didn't press, but the way he looked at me made me feel like he knew more than he let on. That only made me double down. I started telling people Thomas was too sensitive, that he was dragging me down with his boring routine. At dinner one night, I joked that he was so uninteresting, even his body count showed it. Kara laughed until she cried. Thomas just pushed his food around the plate. Julian, our son, asked why Daddy wasn't eating, and I snapped that he wasn't hungry. The look Julian gave me made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it away. To me, Thomas's silence felt like weakness, proof that I was right. I told myself a real man would fight back. He stayed quiet instead. But silence wasn't surrender. It was something else, something I didn't recognize at the time. That weekend, Thomas left his plate untouched again and went straight to his desk after dinner. I asked what he was working on, and he said just numbers, as usual. I laughed and told him no one cared about boring accounting papers. He gave me a look I still can't describe. Steady, almost cold, and then went back to typing. I thought I had won, that he was retreating into his little spreadsheets. But in truth, he was preparing something I couldn't laugh away. The week after the bar incident, I decided the best way to handle Thomas's sulking was to drown it out with more noise. If he wanted to act wounded, fine, I would make myself the center of attention everywhere else. At work, I exaggerated stories about how fun my weekend had been. I left out the part where Thomas barely spoke to me, and instead said everyone was laughing with me all night. My co-workers nodded politely, but I could tell some of them had heard their own version of what happened. Small towns spread rumors quickly, and I knew whispers were already circling about how I had mocked my husband. Instead of worrying, I leaned into it. If people were going to talk, I might as well control the story. When Callum, the bartender, messaged me again, I didn't ignore it. He asked if I wanted to stop by for a drink after work, and I told him maybe. It felt good to have that option, even if I didn't go. The fact that someone wanted me while my husband sat at home in silence gave me a thrill. When Thomas asked that evening why I was late, I said I was working late on reports. He didn't argue. He just nodded, then asked if Callum had texted me. I froze for a second before laughing it off. I said he was paranoid, that not every man who spoke to me was interested. I added that only someone with so little experience would think every interaction was romantic. His face went blank, and I knew I had cut him deep, but I didn't stop. I told him he needed to stop embarrassing me with his jealousy. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He just stood up, rinsed his plate, and went into the office. The sound of the door closing felt heavier than usual. That night I told Kara about it, and she laughed, saying Thomas was pathetic. She told me to keep pushing him until he either toughened up or walked out. I liked the sound of that. To me, it meant I was in control no matter what he chose. My parents reacted differently when I told them. My mother said I was being reckless, that marriage was not a stage for jokes. My father muttered that Thomas was a good man, that maybe I didn't appreciate him. I brushed it off, saying they didn't understand. Marta, though, didn't hold back. She came by the house under the excuse of bringing Julian cookies and gave me a sharp look. She said Thomas didn't deserve ridicule, especially not from his wife. I rolled my eyes, telling her maybe she should mind her own marriage, but she only shook her head and hugged her son tighter. That night, I noticed Thomas sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out. At first, I thought he was doing work, but then I saw it. Our bank statements lined up in order, highlighted in places. I asked why he was digging through those, and he said calmly he was reviewing expenses. I told him that was boring and unnecessary, but he didn't even look up. I tried to joke that he was preparing a tax seminar, but he stayed silent. Something about that silence unnerved me, but I forced myself to believe he was just being petty. 2 days later, when I came home, I saw him slipping a manila envelope into his bag. I asked what it was, and he said it was nothing important. But the way he tucked it away made me suspicious. I pushed, asking if it was another boring spreadsheet project, and he answered yes, without even flinching. For a moment, I almost believed him. That Friday, I went out again, this time telling Thomas I was having drinks with co-workers. In truth, I just wanted to feel seen, so I ended up back at Callum's bar. He gave me free drinks, leaned across the counter, called me lively. I knew people were watching, and part of me wanted them to. When Thomas texted asking when I would be home, I replied short, saying I was networking. Later that night, when I came back, he was awake, sitting at the desk again. He asked if I enjoyed my networking. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid again, that men with no history shouldn't try to lecture their wives about social life. He nodded once, calmly, then went to bed. I felt smug thinking I had shut him down again. What I didn't know then was that his calm wasn't surrender. He was collecting, preparing, building a wall I wouldn't be able to climb. The following week we had dinner at Marta's house, and I told myself it was the perfect chance to win back the narrative. If I could make Thomas look like the brooding, insecure one in front of his family, then no one would take his side. I dressed sharp, wore a bright dress, and carried a bottle of wine like I was the perfect guest. Marta welcomed us politely, but her eyes lingered on me with a kind of quiet judgment. At the table, conversation flowed easily until someone asked about our weekend. I jumped in quickly, saying how we had gone out with friends, but left out the details of Thomas sitting silent while I joked. I said he got all worked up about something small, making it sound like he was fragile. Thomas didn't interrupt. He just cut his food carefully, letting my words hang. That silence annoyed me more than if he had fought back. So I pressed harder. I joked that he had such little experience before me, that he didn't know how to act when other men talked to me. Kara laughed loud, clapping her hands, saying he needed to loosen up. I caught a flash of pain on Thomas's face, but I brushed it off. I told myself he needed to be embarrassed into changing. Marta set down her fork and said quietly that marriage was not something to mock. I waved her off, saying we were just joking, but she didn't smile. Julian sat beside Thomas, looking between us with wide eyes. He asked why Daddy was sad, and I quickly said he wasn't. He was just tired from work. Thomas looked at our son but didn't say a word. That silence again. It was like a knife twisting. Later, while we had dessert, Marta tried to shift conversation to school schedules and summer plans. I interrupted, saying Thomas had been so quiet lately, I sometimes wondered if he even wanted to be at family dinners. People chuckled nervously, but Thomas simply excused himself to the bathroom. Kara leaned over and whispered that he was pathetic, that no real man would walk away like that. I laughed along, thinking I was proving my point. But when Thomas came back, he didn't defend himself. He just thanked his mother for the meal, kissed Julian on the head, and said he had an early meeting the next day. He left the table calmly, his tone flat but not weak. I tried to spin it, telling everyone he was obsessed with work, but the look on Marta's face said she saw through me. After dinner, as we were leaving, Marta pulled me aside on the porch. She said she didn't know what game I was playing, but it was cruel. She warned me that respect, once broken, was hard to repair. I laughed it off, telling her she was dramatic, but inside, I felt a flicker of unease. On the drive home, Thomas didn't say a word. I filled the silence by reminding him that everyone laughed, that people understood I was joking. He kept his eyes on the road, calm as ever, and simply said we would talk later. His voice was steady, almost too steady. That night, I checked his bag when he was in the shower. I found the same manila envelope, now thicker, with notes clipped inside. I saw dates written in neat handwriting, some that matched nights I had been out late. My chest tightened, but I shoved it back in and pretended I hadn't seen. When he came out, I acted normal, but my mind raced. Why was he writing things down? Why wasn't he fighting back? His calmness made me nervous, but I told myself I still had control. I told Kara about it the next day, and she laughed, saying he was probably making lists to cope with his boring life. She told me not to worry, that he'd never have the guts to do anything drastic. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But late at night, when I heard Thomas quietly typing in the office, I couldn't help but wonder if his silence wasn't weakness after all, but something else I hadn't accounted for. A few nights later, I decided to push Thomas even further. If he was going to sit there acting wounded and silent, then I would show him how little his disapproval mattered to me. Kara and I planned another night out at the bar, and of course that meant Callum would be there behind the counter. I told Thomas I was just grabbing a quick drink with my sister, Nothing serious. He only nodded, his face unreadable, and that irritated me. I wanted him to argue, to beg me not to go, but he didn't give me the satisfaction. At the bar, Kara egged me on, saying I should sit closer to Callum, make Thomas jealous when he inevitably heard about it. So I did exactly that. I laughed at every joke Callum told, leaned across the counter, let him brush my hand as he passed me another drink. People noticed. A couple of our mutual friends gave each other looks, and I knew word would travel fast. Part of me liked that. Let Thomas hear the whispers, let him stew in his boring silence. I deserved to feel alive, and if my husband couldn't provide that, someone else would. When I came home later than planned, Thomas was still awake, sitting on the couch this time instead of at his desk. He asked if I had fun networking again, his voice calm but sharp. I laughed, saying he was paranoid, and added that no one was jealous of a man with nothing to show for himself. His eyes darkened, but he didn't raise his voice. He just stood, went to the bedroom, and shut the door. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He got Julian ready for school, packed lunches, even reminded me of my work schedule. That calmness felt unnatural, like he was playing a role I didn't understand. When I told Kara, she said he was finally realizing he had no power. That silence meant surrender. I wanted to believe her, but something about his steady movements unsettled me. At work, I caught myself glancing at my phone every few minutes, half expecting a message from him, but nothing came. That evening, while I scrolled through social media, I noticed more whispers. A friend had posted a blurry photo from the bar of me laughing with Callum, my hand too close to his on the counter. Comments underneath joked about my husband being a saint for putting up with me. I deleted the tag, but the damage was done. When I confronted Thomas, waving my phone, demanding to know if he had planted the photo, he just shook his head. He said calmly that people saw what they saw, that he didn't need to do anything. That terrified me more than anger would have. Later that week, I caught him quietly packing papers into a briefcase. I asked if he had a work trip, but he said only that he had things to take care of. I pressed, demanding to know what kind of things, but he didn't answer. He zipped the case, set it by the door, and went on with his evening. I told myself he was bluffing, trying to make me nervous, but when he left early the next morning, dressed sharper than usual, I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. At Marta's house the following Sunday, she barely spoke to me. When I tried to joke about Thomas being obsessed with his spreadsheets, she looked me in the eye and said some things weren't jokes. Kara rolled her eyes, but I felt the sting. After lunch, while Julian played in the yard, I tried once more to push Thomas into a fight. I told him he was boring, that he was lucky I hadn't left him already for someone who actually lived a little. He looked at me with that same cold calmness and said nothing. Then, without warning, he went inside, grabbed his briefcase, and left. No explanation, no argument, just the sound of the car engine starting. I stood there, stunned, while Marta watched through the window with a look that told me she already knew what I refused to admit. Something bigger was coming, and my husband was preparing it in silence. The knock at the door came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was helping Julian with his homework. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, or maybe Kara dropping by unannounced again. But when I opened the door, a man in a plain suit stood there with a large envelope. He asked for me by full name, his voice steady, and when I nodded, he handed over the envelope and walked away without another word. My stomach tightened as I closed the door. Thomas looked up from the couch, his face unreadable, and I snapped that it was probably junk mail. But when I pulled the papers out, my hand shook. It was legal paperwork, divorce filings, custody motions, even requests for financial records. My name, printed cleanly at the top, mocked me. I shouted at Thomas, demanding to know what this was. He said calmly that he was protecting Julian and himself, that it was nothing personal, just necessary. Nothing personal? My whole life was inside those pages. I accused him of being cruel, of tearing apart our family over a few jokes. He replied that respect wasn't a joke, that he had stayed silent long enough. I screamed that he was unmanly, that no real man hid behind lawyers. He didn't flinch. He simply said I would need my own counsel. Kara rushed over that night after I called her in tears. She ranted that Thomas was a coward, that he was weaponizing paperwork because he couldn't handle me. She filmed a short video ranting about men who run to lawyers instead of fighting for their wives, but she deleted it within an hour when comments turned against her. Even my parents reacted differently than I expected. My mother told me to calm down, that maybe Thomas had been pushed too far. My father muttered that I had been reckless, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt cornered, betrayed even by the people who were supposed to defend me. Marta, of course, said nothing to me directly, but I knew she was the one steadying Thomas through all this. I could imagine her printing out Julian's school calendar, preparing documents, standing at his side like the perfect supportive mother. I hated her more than I could admit. That week was chaos. At work, I couldn't focus. Callum messaged me again, saying he had heard rumors that Thomas was leaving me. I told him people exaggerated, that my husband was just being dramatic. Callum didn't reply for hours, and when he did, it was short. "You'll be fine." The thrill of attention was gone, replaced by the sinking realization that even the man who flirted with me for fun wasn't willing to get involved now that things were real. At home, Thomas moved methodically. He sorted papers, updated folders, kept a neat stack of evidence. I caught glimpses, photos from the bar, bank statements, even screenshots from social media where I had joked about him. Every little thing I had dismissed as harmless was there, lined up against me. When I confronted him, he simply said it wasn't about punishment, it was about proof. Proof of what? That I was a bad wife? That I had humiliated him? I told him he was twisting everything, that I had only wanted fun. He didn't answer. He only told me to prepare for court. Julian sensed something was wrong. He asked why Daddy slept in the guest room now, why Mommy and Daddy didn't sit together at dinner. I told him Daddy was just busy, that nothing had changed, but he frowned like he didn't believe me. When Thomas tucked him in that night, I overheard him saying softly that everything would be okay, that Daddy was making sure Julian felt safe. My chest burned with anger, because it sounded like Thomas was already painting me as the unstable one. Kara told me to fight back harder, to post online about how controlling Thomas had been. She said if I made enough noise, people would take my side. But when I tried, posting a rant about insecure men and boring marriages, the comments didn't support me. Some even said Thomas sounded like a good man who deserved better. I deleted the post quickly, humiliated. My parents begged me to stop making scenes, to get a lawyer and deal with things quietly. But I couldn't stand the thought of losing control of the story. I kept insisting Thomas was the villain, but fewer and fewer people believed me. The final blow came when Priya, an acquaintance who worked in legal administration, told me that Thomas had already filed motions for temporary custody and financial restraints. She said the judge would look at who provided stability, and Thomas had been building his case with calm precision. She wasn't on my side, just relaying facts, but her words felt like a dagger. That night, I confronted Thomas again. I shouted that he was destroying our marriage over pride, that he was ripping Julian's family apart. He looked at me steadily and said it wasn't pride, it was survival. Then he handed me another paper, a schedule showing Julian's school nights with him, weekends alternating. I tore it up in fury, screaming that no judge would ever side with a man over a mother. Thomas calmly pulled another copy from his folder, untouched, and set it on the counter. I felt powerless for the first time. All my jokes, all my laughter, all the times I thought I had silenced him, it all meant nothing now. He had waited in silence, documenting everything, while I gave him every piece of evidence he needed. The walls I thought I controlled were closing in, built brick by the man I had mocked as weak. And as I sat there shaking with rage, I realized he hadn't shouted once. He hadn't needed to. His quiet, his paperwork, his patience, that was his revenge, and I was the one trapped in it. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before the alarm, my chest tight with dread. The house was eerily quiet. Thomas was already dressed, his briefcase by the door, Julian at Marta's for the night, so he wouldn't be caught in the middle. I put on my best suit and told myself I would win by confidence alone. When we arrived at the family court annex, everything smelled of paper and disinfectant, the kind of place where emotions didn't matter. Thomas walked ahead, calm and collected, Alyssa Chen, his lawyer, at his side. She looked professional, efficient, nothing like the villain I wanted her to be. My own lawyer whispered to me that we'd present my side, but his voice lacked conviction. Inside the courtroom, the judge took the bench and immediately called for order. My heart pounded, but Thomas looked like he was on a casual workday. Then it began. Alyssa presented a neat stack of exhibits. My bar photos with Callum, screenshots of social media where I had mocked my husband, even clips Cara had posted online, bragging about me, putting him in his place. Each page felt like a knife. I wanted to scream that it was all taken out of context, but the judge only raised an eyebrow and asked if I had any objections. My lawyer stammered something about jokes not being proof, but the calm voice of Alyssa made it sound ridiculous. She spoke about a pattern of public humiliation and the child's need for stability. She showed daycare sign-in sheets proving Thomas had consistently handled school pickups. She showed financial records highlighting my late-night outings and unexplained charges. It was relentless. When it was my turn to speak, I forced a laugh and said Thomas was twisting everything, that I'd only been trying to have fun. I said he was punishing me for being lively, for not shrinking into boredom. The judge asked if calling my husband a loser in front of witnesses was fun. My throat went dry. I tried to say it was banter, that our circle understood, but the judge cut me off. Your son does not understand banter. That silence after the remark felt like the entire room turning against me. Thomas sat still, eyes on the judge, not on me. He didn't need to defend himself. His evidence spoke louder than I ever had. My family sat behind me. Cara glared at Thomas like she wanted to leap over the benches, but the bailiff warned her once to stay quiet. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, looking at me with disappointment I hadn't seen since childhood. My father stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. On the other side, Marta sat tall, hands folded neatly in her lap, pride clear on her face. Julian wasn't there, but I imagined his little voice asking why Daddy looked sad at dinner, and the memory burned me. When the judge announced the temporary orders, my world tilted. Joint legal custody, but Thomas was granted primary residential custody during the school week. I was given alternating weekends and some holidays. The judge said the child needed the parent who could provide consistent routines, and the evidence showed that was Thomas. My chest tightened, rage rising, but I couldn't move. Then came the financial ruling, a restraining order on joint accounts, no large transfers allowed, and full accounting of all expenditures. The judge cited concerns about responsible financial stewardship. It was like being branded irresponsible in black ink. And finally, the non-disparagement clause. Neither parent was allowed to insult the other, in front of Julian or online. The judge made it clear that my public words had already done damage. I tried to argue that Thomas was weaponizing paperwork, that this was cruel. The judge simply said, "This is consequence." That word echoed in my ears, consequence, as if I had been a child throwing stones instead of a wife trying to assert herself. When the gavel came down, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. People shuffled out, whispers filling the hallway. Cara stormed off first, muttering that Thomas had brainwashed the judge. My mother squeezed my hand briefly, then let go as if even she didn't know what to say. My father walked out silently, shaking his head. Marta stood, placed her hand on Thomas's shoulder, and the two walked out together. Thomas didn't look back at me. Not once. Outside the courthouse, the sky was grey, threatening rain. I stood there, clutching the folder of papers my lawyer had given me, each page heavy with rules I hadn't written. Thomas walked past with Alyssa, his stride steady, briefcase in hand. He paused only to hold the door for Marta, then disappeared down the steps. I wanted to scream his name, to demand he turn around, but my throat wouldn't work. All I could do was stand there, realizing the man I had mocked as weak had dismantled me without raising his voice. His revenge wasn't fury or violence. It was paperwork, patience, and proof. The same silence I had dismissed as weakness had become my undoing. I thought I had power when I laughed at him, when I sneered at his past, when I told everyone he was a loser. But in that courtroom, with the judge's orders in my hand, and Thomas walking away without a glance, I saw the truth. He had never needed to shout. His quiet had been his weapon all along, and now it had left me standing in the rain with nothing but the sound of my own breath. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.